They saw the steel-toed boots caked with the grey dust of dried concrete and the faded flannel shirt over a plain thermal. They saw a labourer, someone who had wandered off a construction site and into a world where she did not belong. They failed to recognise the woman who owned the very steel skeleton that held their glittering world 1,000 feet in the air. Ilara Vance, the unassuming president of Vance Engineering, stood at the reservation desk of the Pinnacle, a valid and long-standing reservation in her name, only to be met with derision, condescending smiles, and the threat of removal by a staff that judged a person by the cut of their suit, not the depth of their intellect. They believed they held all the power, guardians of a velvet rope, but when Ilara, with a quiet sigh, took out her rugged field phone and made a single 45-second call, she wasn't just cancelling a dinner reservation. She was initiating a full-system structural diagnostic that would lock down the entire 90-story skyscraper, trapping them all inside, turning the city's most exclusive restaurant into a gilded cage, and putting a $9 billion real estate deal on indefinite hold. This isn't just a story about snobbery. It's a lesson in foundational power, taught by the woman who builds the foundations. The biting November wind whipped around the canyons of Midtown Manhattan, a relentless howl that seemed to search for any crack in the city's armor. Ilara Vance felt it tug at her ponytail as she stepped out of the yellow cab, the chill a welcome shock after the warmth of the car. She paid the driver, adding a generous tip, and slammed the door shut, the sound swallowed by the urban symphony of sirens and horns. She looked up, her gaze tracing the clean, soaring lines of the Pendleton Tower until it disappeared into the low-hanging, bruised purple clouds. It was a marvel of modern engineering, a needle of glass and steel that defied gravity with breathtaking elegance. Her father had called it his magnum opus, the last project he'd overseen before his heart had given out 2 years ago, leaving a 26-year-old Ilara in charge of a century-old engineering dynasty. She ran a hand over her face, feeling the grit of the day. She had just spent 10 hours 300 feet below this very street, inspecting the final reinforcement phase of the new 2nd Avenue subway extension. The air down there was thick with the smell of damp earth, ozone, and hot metal. Her boots, the same ones she wore now, had crunched on gravel and splashed through puddles of murky water. Her flannel shirt, a soft, worn garment that had been her father's, still carried the faint scent of tunnel dust. She knew she should have gone home to change. But today was November 14th, her parents' anniversary. For 15 years, without fail, her father had booked this specific table at the Pinnacle, the restaurant that crowned the tower he had built. It was a tradition Ilara was not willing to break, not even for the sake of appearances. All she wanted was a quiet meal, a glass of bourbon, and an hour to feel close to him, surrounded by the quiet hum of his greatest achievement. She adjusted the worn leather satchel on her shoulder. It didn't contain a designer clutch, but rather a set of rolled-up blueprints for a bridge retrofitting project and a heavy military-grade tablet. She walked through the building's immense, cathedral-like lobby, her practical rubber-soled boots making no sound on the polished marble floors where stilettos and Italian leather shoes clicked and squeaked. She ignored the sideways glances from men in bespoke suits and women dripping with jewels. She was used to it. In her world of hard hats and steel beams, respect was earned through competence and precision. In their world, it seemed, it was simply purchased and worn. The private elevator to the Pinnacle was an experience in itself. A silent, bronze-clad capsule that ascended the 90 floors in under a minute, the city lights transforming into a glittering carpet below. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a wave of hushed elegance. The air smelled of money, a complex fragrance of expensive perfume, seared scallops, and old wine. The decor was understated and opulent, all dark woods, muted lighting, and a panoramic view of Manhattan that could make even the most jaded heart skip a beat. Behind a small, exquisitely carved mahogany lectern stood Julian Croft, the restaurant's maître d'. Julian was a man who had weaponized posture. He stood ramrod straight, his tuxedo perfect, a single white orchid in his lapel. His silver hair was sculpted into a flawless coif, and his expression was one of carefully cultivated neutrality, a mask that could slip into a welcoming smile for the right guest, or a look of glacial disdain for the wrong one. As Ilara approached, the mask became ice. His eyes did a slow, insulting inventory, starting at her dusty boots, lingering on a small tear in the knee of her canvas work pants, and finally settling on her face with an expression of profound weariness, as if her very presence was a personal burden. Ilara waited. She knew the game. She let the silence stretch, refusing to be the first to break it. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice a low, condescending purr. The service entrance is on the sublevel, accessible from 58th Street. Deliveries are to be signed for by the kitchen manager. Ilara kept her expression neutral, though a familiar fatigue settled in her bones. I don't have a delivery, she said, her voice calm and even. I have a reservation. For 7 o'clock, under the name Vance. Julian allowed a small, pitying smile to touch his lips. He didn't even glance at the large, leather-bound reservation book open on the lectern. I believe you must be mistaken. Perhaps you're thinking of the Pinnacle Grill in the lobby. This is a private establishment, madam. We are fully booked with our regular clientele this evening. The way he said madam made it sound like an insult. I'm not mistaken, Ilara said, her patience beginning to fray at the edges. Elias Vance has had a standing reservation for this table, on this night, for the last 15 years. The reservation was transferred to Ilara Vance. If you would be so kind as to check your book. Julian's smile tightened. I am quite familiar with the Vance account. The late Mr. Vance was a cherished patron. However, I can assure you, there is no one on my list tonight who matches your presentation. At that moment, a loud, braying laugh cut through the restaurant's quiet murmur. A large, florid man in a suit that was just a little too shiny and a watch that was far too large was holding court at a nearby table. This was Marcus Thorne, a real estate developer known for his aggressive tactics and ostentatious displays of wealth. He had made his fortune buying up old properties, tearing them down, and putting up glass boxes devoid of character. He was everything Ilara's father had despised in the industry, a man who built for profit, not for posterity. Thorne noticed the quiet confrontation at the entrance. He nudged one of his sycophantic companions. Julian, he called out, his voice booming with unearned authority, having trouble with the plumbing. Tell maintenance to use the back stairs next time. His table erupted in laughter. Julian shot Thorne a grateful, obsequious smile before turning back to Ilara. You see, he said softly, as if confiding in her. There has been a misunderstanding. Now, if you'll please leave, I can avoid the unpleasantness of calling security. Unpleasantness for whom? Ilara asked, her voice dropping a notch. The fatigue was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. I've had a 10-hour day. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I am not in the mood to be condescended to by a man whose only job is to read a name from a book. Check the book. Before Julian could respond, Thorne scraped his chair back and strode over, a cloud of expensive cologne preceding him. He was a big man, and he used his physical presence to intimidate, looming over Ilara. Listen, sweetheart, he said, his eyes raking over her with open contempt. You're holding up the flow. This is a place for people who matter. People who build this city. He puffed out his chest. Not for the people who clean it. Why don't you run along before you track dirt on the carpet? Ilara met his gaze without flinching. You build buildings, Mr. Thorne. I build the foundations that stop them from collapsing. There's a difference. Thorne's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. Why, you little... Mr. Thorne, Julian intervened, placing a placating hand on the developer's arm. Please, allow me. I'll handle this. He turned to Ilara, his face a mask of finality. I am now asking you to leave the premises. If you do not comply, I will have you removed for trespassing. On what grounds? Ilara challenged. I am a paying customer with a valid reservation. You are causing a disturbance, Julian said smoothly, and you are upsetting our valued guests. Mr. Thorne feels threatened by your aggressive posture. Thorne smirked. That's right, I feel very threatened. She's being belligerent, Julian. Better call the boys in blue. It was the absurdity of it, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance that finally broke through Ilara's control. They weren't just being rude, they were constructing a false reality to justify their prejudice. They saw her clothes, not her character. They saw her gender, not her genius. They looked at the builder of the world around them and saw only dirt. As Julian reached for the phone beneath his lectern, Elara took a slow, deliberate breath. She let her eyes drift past the two men, scanning the room. She wasn't just looking, she was seeing. She saw the subtle reinforcement brackets on the floor-to-ceiling windows, a custom Vance design to handle the wind shear at this altitude. She noted the precise model of the emergency fire shutter system, discreetly integrated into the ceiling panels. Through a service door left slightly ajar, she could just make out the control panel for the building's mass damper, the enormous pendulum in the heart of the tower that kept it from swaying. She knew its serial number by heart, VECD 9000. Her company hadn't just built the tower's skeleton, they had installed its entire central nervous system. And she still had the master key. "Don't bother with security," Elara said, her voice suddenly devoid of all emotion. It was the voice she used on site when a foreman made a critical error, a voice that carried absolute authority. "You're going to need that phone line for a much more important call." Julian paused, phone in hand. "And who, pray tell, would that be?" "The building's chief engineer," Elara said, pulling out her own phone. It wasn't a sleek, fashionable device. It was a rugged, rubber-encased field phone, waterproof and shockproof, with a screen that was bright enough to be read in direct sunlight or the pitch black of a tunnel. Thorne snorted. "Calling your union rep?" Elara ignored him. She swiped to a secure app, an icon of a stylized V over a blueprint grid. A biometric scanner read her thumbprint. "Access granted. Vance Engineering Command Interface. Admin Level Alpha." A list of projects appeared. She tapped Pendleton Tower. A schematic of the building appeared, overlaid with real-time data from thousands of sensors embedded in its structure. "Last chance, Julian," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Find my name in your book." "Security is on its way," Julian snapped, his confidence returning. "Enjoy your night in a holding cell." "Okay," Elara whispered to herself. She navigated to a submenu labeled System Diagnostics and selected a protocol from the list. It was a routine she had designed with her father, a top-to-bottom integrity test that temporarily took all non-essential systems offline to get a clean reading from the structural sensors. It was meant to be run in an empty building in the middle of the night. It was labeled Protocol Sigma 7, Full Structural Lockdown. She looked at Julian, at Thorne's smug face, at the room full of people who judged the world by its shiny surface. "Have it your way," she said, and pressed the execute button on her screen. For about 30 seconds, the world continued as it was. Thorne was telling a story to Julian about a yacht he was buying, his voice full of self-congratulation. The low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses provided a gentle soundtrack to the unfolding disaster. Elara stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the digital clock behind the bar. 7:15 p.m. At 7:16 p.m., the building began to go quiet. The first sign was the music. A soft jazz trio playing over the restaurant's sound system faded out with a soft crackle. A few people looked up, annoyed at the interruption. Then the ornate water feature in the center of the room, a cascading wall of shimmering liquid, sputtered. Its pump whined and then fell silent, the water stilling into a placid pool. "Power fluctuation," Julian muttered, tapping an earpiece to call maintenance. There was no one on the line. Suddenly, the lights in the restaurant flickered once, twice, then dimmed to half their normal brightness, switching to the stark, flat light of the emergency backup system. A nervous murmur rippled through the dining room. "What the hell is going on?" Thorne demanded, looking around as if expecting an immediate answer. "Julian, I've got Arthur Pendleton himself arriving any minute for our meeting. Get this fixed." That's when the elevators chimed, not the gentle arrival chime, but a series of loud, discordant tones from the main elevator bank in the lobby. Then, the illuminated floor indicators above all 4 doors went dark. Outside the panoramic windows, the city lights still glittered, a beautiful, indifferent audience. But inside the 90-story tower, they were sealed in. A low, calm, and distinctly inhuman voice echoed from the ceiling speakers, a voice Elara knew intimately because she had helped program it. "Attention, this is a system-wide announcement. Vance Engineering Protocol Sigma 7 has been initiated. A full system structural diagnostic is now in progress. All elevators, water pumps, and non-essential electronic systems are now in lockdown for a period of 12 hours for sensor calibration. This is not an emergency evacuation notice. Please remain calm. The building is secure. The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket of disbelief. Every diner was frozen, fork halfway to their mouth, wine glass paused in the air. Then the chaos began. Cell phones were snatched up, but there was no service. The building's powerful internal signal boosters were among the non-essential systems that had just been shut down. Julian's face had gone from smug to ashen. He looked from the dead elevators to the panicked faces of his patrons, and then, with a dawning, soul-crushing horror, he looked at the woman in the flannel shirt. She was leaning against a pillar, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a look of detached clinical interest. "You," Julian whispered, the word barely audible. "What did you do?" Thorne laughed, but it was a brittle, nervous sound. "Don't be ridiculous, Julian. This is a cyber attack. Some damn kids. This woman couldn't hack a toaster." But the proof was irrefutable. Thorne's own phone, which had been connected to the restaurant's private Wi-Fi, suddenly buzzed with a dozen frantic text messages that had just broken through. He glanced at the screen. It was his building manager, the texts a frantic cascade of panic. "Boss, the whole tower is offline. It's a total lockdown. Vance Engineering override. They say it was triggered from an admin phone inside the building. Who is up there?" Thorne read the messages, his face losing its color with every word. He looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly curdling into fear. He looked at Ilara, at her dusty boots, her simple shirt, and her rugged industrial phone. And for the first time, he saw not a laborer, but a wielder of immense, incomprehensible power. "Vance Engineering," he said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at her satchel, not with contempt, but with dread, as if it might contain a bomb. "Your name? You said your name was Vance." "Ilara Vance," she corrected him calmly, pushing herself off the pillar and walking toward them. The crowd of diners parted before her as if she were a queen. And according to Clause 17, subsection C of the Pendleton Towers Master Operating Agreement, Vance Engineering reserves the right to initiate a Level 1 diagnostic lockdown in the event of a perceived security threat to its personnel within the structure. "You," she pointed a finger at Julian, "threatened to have me forcibly removed. And you," she pointed at Thorne, "threatened me physically. Congratulations, gentlemen. You are a perceived security threat." Just then, the elevator doors, which had been sealed shut, chimed once more. But they didn't open. Instead, a small screen above the central door flickered to life. It was a direct video link to the building's main security hub in the basement. A panicked face appeared on the screen. "Mr. Croft, Mr. Thorne, this is Head of Security. Can you hear me? We're locked out of the command system. We have an elderly gentleman who just arrived for a meeting, an Arthur Pendleton. He's in the lobby and he's demanding to know why his tower has been turned off." The name hung in the air, a final devastating blow. Arthur Pendleton. The legendary semi-retired patriarch of the Pendleton real estate empire. The man who owned the very ground beneath their feet. The man Thorne was supposed to be meeting to finalize the deal of a lifetime. A new joint venture to develop the Hudson Yards West. A deal that was now, quite possibly, dead. Thorne looked like he was going to be sick. He turned to Ilara, his arrogance completely stripped away, leaving only a raw, pleading terror. "Please," he stammered, "you have to turn it back on. That's Arthur Pendleton. He's my partner." "He was my father's partner first," Ilara said, her voice like ice, "and I highly doubt he'd appreciate you harassing his partner's daughter in the lobby of his own building." She looked past him, a thoughtful expression on her face. 12 hours. That gives you until 7:15 tomorrow morning. I'm sure Mr. Pendleton is a patient man." The silence in the pinnacle was no longer one of shock, but of judgment. The other patrons, the wealthy and powerful, who had watched in amusement as Ilara was being belittled, now stared at Julian and Thorne with unconcealed fury. They weren't angry on Ilara's behalf. They were angry that two fools had gotten them trapped 90 stories in the air, ruining their evening and, for some, jeopardizing their own business dealings. A distinguished elderly man with a sharp suit and a sharper face stepped forward from the crowd. He was a senior partner at a major law firm. "Young lady," he said, his voice respectful, "my name is Samuel Blackwood. I understand your frustration, but you have made your point. There are people here with medical conditions. We need to be able to leave." Ilara looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "The lockdown disengages the express elevators, sir. But it does not affect the emergency systems. The fire stairs are fully operational, though it is 90 flights down. More importantly, the freight elevator, which operates on an independent hydraulic system, can be manually activated from the building's primary control room in the sub-basement." She paused, letting the implications sink in. Of course, someone would have to be in that room to turn it on. Thorne, desperate for a sliver of hope, seized on this. "Then call them, tell them to turn it on," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I can't," Ilara said with a simple shrug. "As you astutely pointed out, there's no cell service. The landlines are also routed through the main digital switchboard, which is currently offline for the diagnostic. The only communication is the security video link, and they can't override my command from their end. It's a closed loop." She held up her field phone. "This is the only device that can talk to the system right now, and it's linked directly to my company's secure satellite network." Julian Croft, who had been standing frozen behind his lectern as if it might save him, finally collapsed into a chair. He buried his face in his hands, his immaculate composure shattered. The reality of his miscalculation was crashing down on him. He hadn't just insulted a customer. He had insulted the one person who held the keys to the kingdom. The video screen above the elevator flickered again. This time, the panicked security chief was gone, replaced by a stern, deeply lined face with piercing blue eyes and a mane of white hair. It was Arthur Pendleton. He looked 80 years old but possessed the energy of a man half his age. He was not panicked, he was furious. "Julian," his voice boomed from the small speaker, the sound tinny but filled with gravelly power. "I have 20 of the city's most powerful people in my lobby, and you have apparently decided to host a slumber party in my restaurant. You have 60 seconds to explain to me what in the goddamn hell is going on before I come up there myself, even if I have to take a window washer's scaffold." Before the terrified maitre d' could form a coherent sentence, Ilara stepped forward, directly into the camera's view. "Hello, Arthur," she said, her voice clear and steady. On the screen, Arthur Pendleton squinted. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, followed by a slow, dawning recognition. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "Ilara. Ilara Vance. Is that you, child? What are you doing up there? Your father's staff said you were down in the tunnels all day." "I was," Ilara confirmed. "I came for dinner. It's the 14th. A look of understanding and deep sadness passed over Pendleton's face. Of course, Elias's table. His expression hardened again as he pieced the situation together. He looked past Ilara, his gaze finding Thorne, who was trying to shrink behind a large potted plant. "Thorne, what did you do?" "Arthur, it was a misunderstanding," Thorne pleaded, stepping back into view. "This woman, she came in dressed like a vagrant. I didn't know who she was." "You didn't know she was Elias Vance's daughter?" Pendleton's voice was dangerously quiet. "The girl who was practically raised on our construction sites. The one who was co-authoring papers on tensile strength at MIT when she was 19. The one who now signs off on the structural integrity of every major project we build. You, a man who wants to build the next great landmark of this city, failed to recognize the single most important engineer in it because she had dirt on her boots." A heavy silence fell. Pendleton's gaze shifted to Julian. "And you, Julian. You I entrusted with the gate. Your job is to recognize quality, not just designer labels. Elias Vance's reservation is sacred in this establishment. You know that? You dared to deny his daughter his table." Julian looked up, his face pale and tear-streaked. "Mr. Pendleton, I am so sorry. I made a terrible error in judgment." "You did not make an error," Pendleton's voice cut like a whip. "You made a choice," Pendleton's voice crackled, each word a chip of granite. "You chose arrogance over service. You chose prejudice over perception. You have failed in your most fundamental duty, and now my tower, my guests, and the daughter of my oldest friend are paying the price." His image on the screen seemed to grow, his fury transcending the small digital display. He looked past Julian, his gaze finding Ilara. The anger in his eyes melted away, replaced by a profound and weary concern. Ilara, my dear, I am beyond mortified. This is not how we honor your father. This is not the standard Elias and I built this city upon. Tell me what needs to be done. Tell me how to fix this. The question hung in the supernaturally quiet room. Every eye was on Ilara. She was no longer an interloper, a piece of grit in the gears of their gilded world. She was the ghost in the machine, the architect of their gilded cage, and now their only hope for release. The diagnostic has to run its course, Arthur, she said, her voice even carrying across the silent dining room. It's a full-spectrum structural analysis, a deep tissue scan of every beam, every weld, every sensor in the building's nervous system. The protocol is designed to be uninterruptible for safety reasons. It will take the full 12 hours. A collective groan, a wave of despair washed through the restaurant. A woman in a silk dress audibly sobbed. Marcus Thorne looked as if he might faint. However, Ilara continued, and the room fell instantly silent again, every person leaning in, clinging to that single word. A protocol designed to be uninterruptible is not the same as one that is irreversible. There is a manual override. It's a failsafe my father insisted upon. For situations exactly like this, a system lockdown that becomes a liability. She held up her rugged field phone. It requires a two-step bilateral authorization. The first is a Class Alpha voice command from me, transmitted via a secure satellite uplink from this device. The second, she paused, letting the weight of the next word settle, is a simultaneous physical key turn in the primary control room, located in the third sub-basement. Her gaze met Arthur's on the screen. I have the voice command. You, Arthur, are one of only 3 people on this planet who possesses a copy of that physical key. Pendleton nodded slowly, the pieces clicking into place. The Medusa key. It's in the master vault in my office, on the 88th floor. A short, bitter laugh erupted from a man near the bar. His office is 2 floors below us, he said to no one in particular. It might as well be on Mars. So we're still trapped, Thorne wailed, the sound a miserable, pathetic whine that grated on the raw nerves of everyone present. We're stuck here all night. Not necessarily, Ilara said, and for the first time the barest hint of a smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of amusement, but of grim satisfaction, the smile of an engineer watching a complex problem unfold toward its elegant, inevitable solution. She turned her attention to the maitre d'. Julian, earlier you were so eager to call security. I believe now would be an opportune moment. Behind your lectern there is a small recessed panel. Inside you will find a single red button. It is a direct, hardwired analog line to the Fire Department of New York Central Dispatch. It bypasses all digital systems. Push it. Tell the dispatcher that we have a non-emergency, high-priority systems failure at the Pendleton Tower. Tell them we require ESU assistance for a vertical access and engineering override situation. Julian, his hands trembling so badly he could barely unlatch the panel, fumbled for the button. His face, once a mask of smug authority, was now a ruin of slack-jawed terror and bewilderment. What are you doing? Thorne stammered, his mind unable to process the rapid shifts in strategy. My father taught me 2 fundamental principles of engineering, Mr. Thorne, Ilara said, her voice clear and calm, a lecture delivered in the most unusual of classrooms. The first is that every structure must have redundancy. The second is that there is always more than one way to get from point A to point B. Especially, she added, her eyes sweeping the room, taking in the bespoke window fittings and the custom-milled ceiling panels, in a building you designed yourself. The 20 minutes that followed were the longest of anyone's life. The silence in the restaurant was no longer merely the absence of sound. It had become a living entity, thick with unspoken anxieties, resentments, and a growing grudging respect for the woman in the flannel shirt. She had walked over to the table by the window, her father's table, and sat down, her back straight, her posture one of serene command. She looked out at the sprawling tapestry of city lights, a universe her family had helped to build. Then a new sound began to intrude upon the quiet. At first, it was a faint, distant pulsing. A vibration felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It grew steadily, a rhythmic, powerful whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that resolved into the unmistakable beat of heavy helicopter blades. A brilliant white searchlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the panoramic windows and illuminating the stunned faces of the diners. They rushed to the glass, their personal dramas forgotten, replaced by the sheer spectacle unfolding outside. Hovering with impossible precision in the turbulent winds, 90 stories above Manhattan was a heavy-lift chopper from the NYPD's elite emergency service unit. Its presence was a raw, visceral display of power, a stark contrast to the refined, impotent luxury within the restaurant. As the diners watched, mesmerized, two figures in heavy tactical gear were lowered on a winch, not towards the restaurant's main windows, but to the smaller private terrace of the executive offices 2 floors below. On the video screen, which had remained a silent witness, Arthur Pendleton's face reappeared. He was no longer in the lobby, but in his own office, the ESU team visible behind him. "They're in, Ilara." His voice was tight with adrenaline. "They breached the terrace door. The vault is open. I have the Medusa key in my hand." "Good," Ilara replied, her voice a steady anchor in the swirling chaos. "Now comes the hard part. The primary control room is in sub-basement 3. The elevators are down. You'll need to take the emergency fire stairs. It's 93 flights, Arthur. Are you up for it?" A weary but determined grin spread across the old man's face. "Ilara, my knees will curse your name for a month, but I would crawl down on my hands before I let this peacock." He jabbed a thumb towards the restaurant above, in Thorne's general direction, "destroy the legacy of my friendship with your father. I'm on my way." The screen went blank, leaving them once again in their suspended reality. Now all they could do was wait. The atmosphere in the pinnacle had undergone a profound chemical change. The power dynamics had not just shifted, they had been inverted, rewritten from the foundation up. Ilara Vance was no longer the subject of their scorn, but the center of their universe. Patrons who had laughed at Thorne's crude jokes now gave her a wide, respectful berth. Samuel Blackwood, the lawyer, approached her table not with a demand, but with a humble offering: a glass of still water. "You must be thirsty, Miss Vance," he'd murmured, setting it down as if leaving an offering at a shrine. A famous actress who had earlier looked at Ilara with undisguised disgust quietly draped a ridiculously expensive cashmere wrap over the back of an empty chair near her. "The draft from the windows can be deceptive," she offered before retreating. Ilara acknowledged each gesture with a quiet, non-committal nod, her focus remaining on the city outside. She sat at the table her father had loved, the polished wood cool beneath her forearms. For the first time that evening, she let the mask of the commander slip, just for a moment, in the privacy of her own thoughts. The anger that had fueled her was a clean, hot flame, but beneath it lay a deep, cold ocean of grief. This table was a monument. Here her father had celebrated anniversaries, closed deals, and sketched designs on cocktail napkins that would become iconic parts of the city's skyline. Here he had explained to a 10-year-old Ilara the principles of tensile strength using 2 forks and a sugar packet. The condescension from Julian and Thorne wasn't just an insult to her. It was a desecration of this space, a smearing of grime on a sacred memory. Her actions tonight weren't just about teaching a lesson in humility. They were about defending her father's ghost. They were about proving that the things he valued, integrity, substance, a foundation of character, were not just quaint ideals, but the true sources of power. Marcus Thorne approached her table, his movements hesitant and clumsy, a stark contrast to his earlier predatory swagger. His expensive suit seemed to hang off him, suddenly 2 sizes too large. His face was pale, slick with a film of desperate sweat. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice a hoarse croak, I have no words to express the depth of my regret. My behavior was inexcusable. I was arrogant, offensive, and profoundly stupid. There is no excuse. But I am asking you, is there anything at all I can do to make amends?" His plea was transparent. He wasn't apologizing for his character. He was trying to salvage his deal. The $9 billion Hudson Yards West venture, the crowning achievement of his career, now rested entirely in the hands of the woman he had tried to have thrown out like trash. Without the seal of approval from Vance Engineering, the project was nothing but a stack of useless paper. Ilara finally turned her gaze from the window and looked at him. Her eyes were not angry or triumphant. They were the eyes of a structural engineer examining a faulty beam, cool, appraising, and utterly unimpressed. This was the part of the job she despised, the messy, unpredictable human element. The politics, the groveling, the power plays. Her father had navigated these waters with a gruff, back-slapping charm. She preferred the clean, immutable certainty of physics. "Making amends, Mr. Thorne, is not a transaction," she said, her voice quiet but possessing a density that absorbed all other sound. "It isn't a single grand gesture performed under duress to achieve a desired outcome. It is a fundamental architectural change in behavior. You want to build in this city? Then you must learn to respect the people who truly build it. Not just the financiers in their corner offices or the architects with their fashionable glasses, but the surveyors who walk the land, the ironworkers who dance on the high steel, the electricians who weave the copper veins, the masons, the welders, the thousands of people who show up in dusty boots and leave a piece of their lives embedded in the concrete." She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly, forcing him to lean in as well, a supplicant before her. "As for your deal with Arthur, that is a matter for you and him to discuss. But the involvement of my company is another matter entirely. My father built Vance Engineering on a foundation of trust that is now a century old. We do not attach our name, our legacy, to any project helmed by an individual who demonstrates such a catastrophic lack of judgment and character. We will be officially withdrawing our preliminary feasibility study and our letter of intent tomorrow morning. You are, of course, free to hire another engineering firm." She paused, letting the final blow land with surgical precision. "I wish you the very best of luck finding one that the city's planning commission trusts as much as they trust a Vance." The color drained completely from Thorne's face, leaving it a sickly grayish white. It was a death sentence, and he knew it. No other firm had the reputation, the political capital, or the sheer institutional knowledge to fast-track a development of that scale. He had spent 5 years of his life on this project. It was his legacy. He opened his mouth to protest, to beg, to offer her anything, but he saw the absolute unyielding finality in her eyes. It was like arguing with gravity. He simply nodded, a slow, palsied movement, a man hollowed out. He turned and shuffled back to his table, a ghost in a shiny suit. Financially and spiritually ruined, not by a market crash or a bad investment, but by a single casual moment of cruelty. An hour and 17 minutes after Arthur Pendleton had left his office, an eternity measured in the sips of water and the strained, polite murmurs of the other captives, Ilara's field phone chimed. It was not a call, but a simple text-based system alert that flashed on the screen in stark green letters: "Manual override key engaged, primary control, sub-basement 3, system standing by for alpha-level voice authorization." Ilara stood. The entire restaurant, as if connected by a single nerve, fell silent and watched her. She held the phone to her mouth, her thumb depressing the transmit button. In the absolute quiet, her voice was a clear, unwavering instrument of command. "Vance Engineering Integrated Systems. This is Ilara Vance, Admin Level Alpha. Authorize immediate override and full system reboot. Authorization code: Sierra Echo Vance 1985. Terminate protocol Sigma 7. A synthesized voice, crisp and inhuman, replied from her phone's small speaker, audible to everyone in the room. Voice print and authorization code confirmed. Ilara Vance, Alpha, terminating protocol Sigma 7, rebooting all primary and non-essential systems. Estimated time to full operational status, 10 minutes. A wave of relieved, breathless applause swept through the room. It wasn't celebratory, it was the sound of a collective exhalation, of a tension that had become unbearable finally being released. Ilara looked across the room at Julian Croft. He was standing beside his lectern, not as a guardian, but as a relic. His perfect tuxedo was rumpled, his posture broken. He had not been fired by Pendleton on the video link. He had not been subjected to further tirades. In a way, his punishment was far more profound. He had been rendered completely, utterly irrelevant, a ghost haunting the monument to his own spectacular failure. The building began to wake up. First came a low thrum from the vents as the main climate control system spun to life. Then the lights, which had been on the flat, sterile emergency grid, flickered and returned to their full, warm, artfully designed glow. The gentle jazz music, which had been cut off mid-note, resumed its soft melody. With a gentle gurgle, the water wall in the center of the room began to cascade once more, its shimmering surface reflecting the renewed light. A moment later, a soft, melodic chime echoed from the elevator bank. The doors to freedom, to the world outside their 90-story prison, slid open with a quiet, expensive sigh. The exodus was a strange, subdued affair. The patrons, grumbling but visibly grateful, filed out in an orderly line. No one pushed, no one raised their voice, and almost none of them met Ilara's eye. It was a mixture of shame, awe, and a primal fear of the quiet power they had so spectacularly misjudged. As she picked up her worn leather satchel, preparing to leave, Samuel Blackwood approached her one last time. "Miss Vance," he said, extending a hand. His own was steady. "On behalf of everyone here tonight, I offer you a sincere apology for our collective behavior. You taught us all a valuable, if humbling, lesson." Ilara shook his hand, her grip firm and dry. "The lesson is simple, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her voice devoid of malice. "Foundations are important, in buildings and in people." She rode the bronze-clad elevator down alone. The smooth, silent descent was a moment of profound decompression. She felt the exhaustion of the 10-hour workday, the emotional drain of the confrontation, and the deep, aching void left by her father's absence. When the doors opened into the soaring marble expanse of the lobby, she saw Arthur Pendleton waiting for her. He was leaning against a pillar, looking utterly spent, but with a fierce, energized light in his eyes. The lobby was empty now, the crowds and security having melted away into the night. 93 flights, he said, shaking his head as she approached. He pushed himself off the pillar with a groan. "My knees are going to file a formal grievance. But it was worth every step. I haven't seen Thorne look that terrified since the Lehman Brothers collapse." "I'm sorry you had to get involved, Arthur. I could have waited it out," Ilara said. "Nonsense," he waved a dismissive hand. "I'm proud of you. Your father, Elias, was a genius, the best dam engineer this city will ever see, but he was too much of a gentleman. He would have accepted their pathetic apology and let it go, just to keep the peace." He placed a heavy fatherly hand on her shoulder. "You, child, you have his brains, but you have your mother's steel in your spine. You didn't just get an apology, you demanded a standard. You reminded them all that the real power in this city isn't in the boardrooms or the bank vaults. It's in the blueprints. It's in the hands and the minds of the people who know how things work." He sighed, a deep, weary sound. "The Pinnacle will be sending you a formal written apology, which you will never read. Julian Croft is no longer in my employ. More importantly, Thorne's project is dead. I'm pulling my funding and my name. But," he said, his blue eyes twinkling with a new idea, "that leaves me with a prime piece of city real estate and a need for a new partner." He looked at her, his gaze sharp and clear. "I was going to build another soulless glass tower for bankers, a monument to greed. But after tonight, I'm thinking something different, something with character, something with grit, something that lasts. I'll need a chief engineer I can trust implicitly. Someone who understands that the foundation is everything." Ilara looked at the old man, her father's best friend, and saw in his tired face the glint of a new beginning. A small, genuine smile finally broke through her exhaustion. "I'll have my office send you our preliminary fee schedule in the morning, Arthur," she said. She walked out of the revolving doors and into the cold, clean night air. The wind had died down, and the city's roar had softened to a gentle hum. She looked up one last time at the magnificent tower, a needle of light stitching the earth to the sky. Her father's legacy, and now, unequivocally, hers to protect and to define. They had tried to lock her out, to tell her she did not belong in the world she had built. They had forgotten the first and most important rule. The one who lays the foundation is the one who truly owns the house.